Are you tired of your boys looking like pale, grotty runts? Do you want them to be the biggest, meanest, greenest, crumping machines in all of the galaxy? Well, I've got the painting secrets that'll turn your mob into a WAAAAAAAGH-worthy masterpiece. Welcome to the Painting Coach. Let's go. I've primed all the miniatures using Wraithbone, and that's because we're going to use contrast as the base for a lot of this. Now, I will show you the model when I finish the contrast stage, and you can probably leave a lot of your boys at this point. But we're going to push this knob just a little bit further by adding some layering on to make him really pop. The first thing we're going to do is get that flesh based, and the colour we're using is Gutrippa Flesh, which is a really nice pale green contrast paint. Now get this over all of the fleshy bits. Try not to get it on any of the other areas because it will be a little difficult to clean up. Just work your way around and make sure you get it into the recesses and don't leave any little white bits exposed. Once that's completely dry, you'll see you've got a very nice desaturated green. Now, I think this colour is fantastic for things like snotlings, but I don't think it quite works for the orc boys. So what we want to do is increase this saturation a little bit and boost how vivid the flesh looks. To do this, we're going to take some Mantis Warriors green contrast paint. Now, we're not going to paint this over the all area like we did in the previous step. What we're going to do is take most of it off our brush, and we're going to paint it as though we were glazing. So it's going to be very little paint, and it's a very thin layer across the top of the flesh. And what you'll start to see is as this dries, it starts to look a lot more saturated. I think is perfect as a base for orc skin. Now that has significantly punched up the green. Let's start the yellow. I'm painting this orc as a Bad Moon, so why not use Bad Moon yellow contrast paint? It's the rule of the galaxy. Get this onto all of the armor plates. Now as I do this video, you'll start to see that I slowly add more and more armor plates as I go through, realizing I've missed bits off. And this is the beauty of the contrast method. Whichever kind of orc clan you're doing, just substitute the Bad Moon yellow contrast paint for a contrast paint of your choice. If you want red, use Baal Red. If you want something like green, you can use Warp Lightning. If you want black, use Black Templar. You can use whatever colour you want. When that's dry, it's time to shade the yellow, and the colour we're going to use is Cassandora Yellow, but I have thinned this with a mix of contrast medium. Now, if you're using the brand new Cassandora Yellow shade, you don't need to do this. I've got the old one, so I need to thin it with contrast medium 1:1. And I'm going to paint this all over the armour, making sure it settles in the recesses and dragging it down to where I want the shadows to be. I'm going to paint some of the leather next, and the colour I'm going to use for that is Garaghak Sewer. This is a really nice brown colour, and it dries very nicely on the model as well. And it's worth mentioning at this point, if anything dries a little bit too glossy compared to what you want, then feel absolutely free to use some matte varnish just to dull it down a little bit. I'm going to swap brands to paint the pants, and the colour I'm using is Occultist Robe by Army Painter. Now this is from this Speed Paint 2.0 range. You could potentially use something like Space Wolves Grey from the contrast range, but you might need to put 2 coats of it down. Now I'm just going to work this all over, and I find this settles really nicely. You don't get too much patchiness with it. Some speed paints you do, same we do with some contrast, but I find this works quite nicely. And for the bluey grey colour I want, this is really nice. When that's dry, we'll paint all of the black bits, such as the boots and the vest on this particular model. Now, the colour I'm using for this is Black Templar, and I love Black Templar contrast paint because it gives you a little bit of a blue hue as it dries on those highlight areas, which means it's really easy to go in and push the value up quite nicely. Take your time with this. It's a very powerful paint. You don't want to spill it on bits that you've already finished. I'm also going to paint all of the bits that I want to be like a black metallic colour, such as the axe head and that gun icon on his boss pole. I wanted something a little bit different to the Garaghak Sewer for all the straps. So again, I'm using Speed Paint 2.0 and I'm using Desolate Brown. This is a nice kind of sickly brown type colour, which when it dries looks really, really nice. And again, the beauty of this and contrast paint is it just gets into those recesses and gives you a really nice bit of shading. I'm going to use Burnished Red again from Speed Paint to paint the holster. And this is a lovely colour and this dries so nicely. Next up, we'll paint all the bone elements. Now, you may need to tidy some of these areas up with some Wraithbone paint like I did. I was a little bit messy. But then we're just going to take some Boney Matter and paint this all over the bone areas. If it does go on a little thick, we'll just wick it away so that we kind of stay in the area rather than let it pool too heavily in the recesses. This is probably the worst model to show you this, but for painting inside the mouth, I take some Volupous Pink contrast paint and just work this in there and let it settle in the recesses. This gives you a really nice, simple effect. Moving on to the first of the metallics then, the colour we're going to use is dark aluminium from Vallejo. You can use whatever metallic colour you like. If you've got lead belcher, that's fine. If you've got Socote silver, absolutely fine. I just like this because it flows very nicely and covers very well. In terms of bits I'm painting, I'm focusing on things like the steel toe caps on the boots, the weapon, and some of the mechanical parts of the big chopper. To add some contrast with the metallics, we're going to take a little bit of Balthasar Gold, and we're going to paint this over other areas such as the exhaust, some of the fastenings on the boss pole, and also on some of the trinkets. To paint the fingernails, we'll use a Kellyan green contrast paint. Again, this is a really nice colour. You may need 2 coats just to get that nice deep greeny blue, but this is a nice simple step. On to some shading then on the metallic. So the first thing we'll do is take some Nuln Oil and paint this all over the silver and the Balthasar Gold that we've put down. The absolute key with this is we're very careful around those areas we don't want to get it. So for example, where we've got metallic parts touching yellow armour, be very, very careful. Now you can tidy it up by rebasing the area with Wraithbone, but the less we have to do that, the better. To add a little bit of a grime effect, we're going to take some Agrax Earthshade and paint this over the silver parts. We're not going to paint it over the Balthasar Gold parts, just the silver parts. And just be careful where this settles to make sure that it doesn't pull too heavily. This gives you a nice, grimy, metallic effect. And there you go. If you wanted to stop here, so if you were painting your boys at the same time and you're happy with them, I think this is a pretty decent tabletop standard, and it looks nice and it really does pop. That yellow's looking fantastic. Let's push on and add some more detail though. Love a bit of detail. So we're going to take some chrome from Vallejo Model Air, which is a really, really bright silver, and we're going to use this to highlight the black metallic parts as well as any silver parts. So when we come to the black metallic parts, we just want to dab our brush along the edges and put little nicks and scratches in. So it's not a very precise highlight, it's just a very weathered highlight to show where the paint has worn away at the edges. For the metallic parts, we do want that edge highlight, so we're just going to drag our brush along the sharp edges of the model, giving us a really nice crisp highlight. For the pants, we're going to tidy them a little bit where we've got some tide marks, and this is very nice and straightforward. We'll take some Russ Grey, and we're going to mix this 50-50 with the Occultist cloak we use as the base layer. Now, we're going to need to work fairly quickly here, but just make sure you haven't got too much on your brush. And paint is over the general area and also any sharp folds that you've got. And you can gradually build this up if you need to make it brighter towards the front, where things like the knee and the thigh are going to catch quite a lot of light. We'll finish that up with pure Russ Grey just to give a nice highlight at the end, focusing on the folds and also detailing in some of the wrinkles that we've got there. We're going to use Fenrisian Grey later on, and you can add a little bit of this on here as well if you really want to push it. To highlight all the Balthasar Gold areas, we're going to take some Canoptek Alloy. And again, we're just going to drag this along the sharp part of the model, and that's going to give us a nice crisp highlight. It's just going to catch the light and reflect, so you get the impression when it's on the tabletop that it's a really nice bit of metal. We're going to start highlighting that black, and we're going to use 2 different styles. So we're going to use some Thunderhawk Blue as the first highlight, and for the boots, we're just going to drag it along those sharp folds to get a nice crisp highlight. When it comes to the black waistcoat, we're going to use a dotting technique. It's called stippling, and we're going to stipple around where we've got those nice big folds and creases and build up that highlight really nice and easily. We're then going to take some Fenrisian Grey and use this very sparingly, again in a very similar style to the previous step. So on the boots, we're just going to drag it along those sharp edges and those folds to get a nice crisp highlight, making sure it stays inside the Thunderhawk Blue. And then on the vest itself, we're going to use that stippling technique again, where we're just going to stipple it inside the Thunderhawk Blue. And this is going to give us a really nice impression of nice worn black leather. Like I said before, if you want to put some of this on the knees and on the really sharp folds of the pants, you can do that as well. To highlight the whole styling, take some Squig Orange, which is a really nice desaturated bright red. And again, we're just going to stipple this along those edges to give us a nice crisp highlight. To highlight all of the wraps, we're going to take some Carrick Stone, and we're just focusing on the edges of the wraps here. So if we've got a nice sharp edge, we can drag the brush down, we'll do that. If we haven't, we'll just need to be very careful, making sure we haven't got too much on our brush. And again, focusing on the bits that are going to catch the most light. So we're not going to paint the entirety of the wraps, just the bits that are facing upwards. For the Garaghak sewer, we're going to take Zamizi Desert, And again, when it comes to highlighting this, we're going to focus on the edges of the leather. Where we can, we're going to use that stippling technique, again, to give us a nice worn effect. And this will blend in quite nicely as it starts to dry. So just work your way around, picking out those bits with the Tzimisce Desert. All right, it's time to rough up that bright yellow armor a bit. And this is a really nice, effective technique. So we can take a very bright yellow. We're going to take Dorn Yellow. If you haven't got this, something like Ice Yellow is perfect. And what we're going to do with this is we're essentially going to do a stipple highlight whilst edge highlighting. So what we want to do is we want to drag it along the edges of the armor, but we don't want to do it smoothly. We want to do it in a jagged way. So like we were stippling, we're going to stipple along the edges using them to guide us. Where we've got nicks and scratches that are sculpted into the model, we're just going to highlight the bottom layers to really accentuate them. And as you start to do this across the model, you can really see how the weathering is bringing the armor to life. Once that's dry, we're going to go in with some Skavenblight Dinge and paint this over the same areas that we did the Dorn Yellow in the previous step. Now, the key with this is to make sure that we don't do it all over the Dorn Yellow. We want to use this fairly sparingly. It's easy enough to go back in and add more. This just demonstrates where the armor's been scratched down to its base constituent rather than just the paint being chipped off. I'm going to give the flesh a little bit of a highlight with Ogryn Camo. Now, this is a nice brighter colour. Generally, I'm focusing on the bits that are quite stretched. So we're looking at the knuckles, things like that. We're looking at the nose and the lips on the face. So we're not going to go over the top with it. If you do need to repair any areas, you can use Ork Flesh base paint. But generally, it's looking okay on this model. The final highlight on the flesh is with Krieg Khaki. And this is just for those areas that are going to catch the most light and those areas where you've got the skin stretch. So again, we're looking at things like the knuckles. On this particular model, we've got the bottom of the biceps, we've got some veins. And again, use this fairly sparingly. You can always go back in and add more if you need to. We'll finish off with a dot of white paint on the lens and the eye. Use whatever colour you want. And then finally, we'll just take a little bit of Baal Red contrast paint and paint that over the white. Clean your brush off, then wipe it over the lens. You get that nice red glowing effect. And there we have it. Really simple and easy to paint Orc boys. I really hope you enjoyed this video and you can see how with just some contrast paint and speed paint, you can get it to a decent tabletop level. But then by adding some highlights, you can really elevate how it looks. I'm really happy with how this has turned out. Again, I've fallen into the trap of wanting to paint more, but I've got to be focused and I've got to stick to what I'm working on. So thank you so much for watching. Leave a like and a comment down below. I'll see you next time.